It's a pleasure to have you with us, Kavitha. Thanks so much for taking time out. You have a busy schedule and you've written a new exciting book, which we're excited to talk about. On Network Capital, our mission is to democratize mentorship and enable people to make meaningful career transitions. And data is the flavor of the season, but more fundamental to how we think about work and imagine the future. So would love to know a bit about you, what got you interested in data and what your career has been like so far.
So I am a pure computer scientist. So in the sense, my PhD from U Chicago was in distributed computing. So I looked at algorithms to do with grid computing. You might have heard of that today in the avatar of cloud computing.
Right.
A very technical background. At some point after I graduated and I worked for a bit in the US, I found myself at IIMA in a management school, which was definitely a very different environment for me. So I kind of had to reinvent myself, which is how I got into data visualization first. So till then, I was very much into algorithms and simulations and that kind of stuff. So as part of something that would be useful for our MBA cohort, I started looking at data visualization. This was probably 13 or 14 years ago. Mm-hmm. And I both started learning and teaching data visualization, and it took a life of its own. So it became a very popular course, and I started teaching it across many different programs, and students really found it very helpful. And that's how I got into data visualization as a field. And as part of that, I would have typically one session in my course on how not to mislead with graphs. Mm-hmm. And that's how I came about researching and learning and finding out more about what my particular book is about.
And it's so important because now data is not just relevant for computer scientists and people who engage with artificial intelligence systems, but also for the common person to make sense and not be fooled by graphs and charts. So could you give us a sense of some examples that helped your students understand it and ones that you've picked in your book to demonstrate points of how to not get fooled by data?
So the examples are all over, right? So if you just look out, and once you know what to see, you'll be surprised at the number of places where these misleading graphs actually jump out at you literally. Once you know, once you put on that lens, rather. So when I explain this to my students, I use a host of real-life examples. So there are some well-known examples in the field, including a bar chart that was actually used by a cigarette manufacturer to show nicotine levels in their cigarettes and to show that they had very low levels compared to their competitors by using a distorted bar chart. And there's another well-known example in terms of Steve Jobs actually using a 3D pie chart, kind of distort or amplify Apple's share compared to competitors, right? So these are floating out there, but when I show these to the students, and these are all well-known names, so they're actually in shock when they realize that these graphs are actually being used by almost everybody.
And newspapers do this all the time, right? When they have to make a point, they'll pick out a graph, they'll change the scale, they will introduce all sorts of distortions, which are not technically wrong, but the first impression that a person will get on looking at would be to get to the wrong inference. So what are some things that have been helpful for your students to become wary of such a thing? And how do we take it beyond the walls of, say, management schools and technical schools? Is there a way that we can make the common person more aware of these challenges?
Right. So in part, that's what I tried to do with the book, because I've been teaching it now, not only to management students, but in a large range of our executive education programs instead. And one thing that surprised me, I teach this to so-called data scientists as well, and to people who've spent their lives creating graphs. And at the end of the day, even those who have been doing this is their bread and butter, right? Creating graphs, looking at data is what they do day in and day out. But in spite of all that, they would still be shocked at some of these graphs. In fact, what would be most surprising is they wouldn't even realize that they had been creating a misleading graph all their lives.
Right.
So I'm not saying it's always intentional. Sometimes the person creating the graph doesn't even know that it is something that they're not supposed to be doing, because they have a particular message and they feel this is just bringing that out in a clearer manner, not realizing that they're actually exaggerating the message to their advantage.
Understood.
So in terms of bringing it out of the management domain and bringing it out to everybody, that's exactly what the book is trying to do. In fact, the youngest reader of my book so far is a 13-year-old. So one of my friends, her son read the book cover to cover and said he actually enjoyed it. And for me, that was a big validation, because I wanted to kind of democratize the knowledge so that anybody who looks at a graph would be able to now critique that graph with the right lens.
Well, that's true. I mean, I don't think it's a better compliment than a 13-year-old reading it and understanding it. How did you structure the book? Like, what did you really want the reader to take away after every chapter?
So I've structured the book in terms of the common kinds of distortions that can happen. And I've also kind of threaded in the empirical studies that are relevant to that particular theme. So it's not just me talking about what might be right or what might be wrong, but there are a host of research articles around these different themes. So I actually bring that in so that as a reader, you can actually go back. If something actually interests you, you can go back to that particular research article and read further. So I have links, and I also tie it to a lot of real world examples. So this is what is wrong with this particular way of creating this graph. And these are the places where you can actually go online and look at those examples for yourself to find out why something and in what way something has been used for a particular narrative.
Right.
So,
what do you think about the way India has built its data visualization stack? What do you feel that we as a country are doing well, and what are some areas of improvement that we can bring about to sort of democratize data-driven insights?
I think this is still in its infancy. There's still a long way to go, because there's so much that is still unknown in terms of how things are actually going to play out. Right? So I hope whatever we've come up with is just the first iteration. And I sincerely hope there will be many more iterations to it as we realize the repercussions of whatever we are stating and doing. So one thing for me is these should not be set in stone. These should evolve as we figure these things out as a society, because we still have a lot to grapple with in this case.
Yeah, absolutely. So when your executives come to your class, or when perhaps you go and speak at different forums, what are some of the harder things to make others realize or visualize that they are missing out on when it comes to data visualization?
So I typically start from the basics for anybody, right? And what is interesting is when I say we're going to cover some basics, most people feel that we already know them. Yeah. I've been creating charts, I've been using Excel pretty much all my life. So why do I need to know the basics? But in the very first class, when we start talking about a very concrete framework in terms of how you want to go about visualizing your data. So you look at your data and you definitely don't want to say, okay, I'm going to create a bar chart or I'm going to create a pie chart. Right? So I do ask them to turn that question on their head. Think about the audience. Think about how this data is going to be used. Think about who is going to use this data. That's the first thing you want to figure out. And the second thing you want to figure out is the overall message you want to convey through this data.
Yeah.
What is the relationship in the data you want to bring out? These two questions then will flow towards your choice of how you want to represent the data. And then I take them through that particular framework, of course, the theoretical aspects of it. And then we do a lot of small scenario-based problem solving there once they know how to use the framework. So when they start applying that to a large variety of business scenarios, it helps them kind of understand the process. So that's the very first session. And I think by then, most people realize that there is so much more to understand in terms of effective data visualization.
Absolutely. Chicago has such a great legacy of quantitative assessments and measures. There are wonderful books that have been written around economics there. So in a way, your career did undergo a transition, right? From studying computer systems, cloud computing, distributed infrastructure, to now sort of being a person who's using these insights to enable better policy, better business decision making. Why did you make this shift? Because I see you more as a research scientist in an AI lab, and you're doing now perhaps the more difficult work, but it seems like there is a transition underway.
I would say it's more of a dual interest. I haven't given up what I do. So I still work particularly in the area of ad hoc computing, device-to-device computing, and I look at peer-to-peer algorithms there because that's something I'm very interested in, distributed intelligence per se. So that's still a part of my work that is very close to my heart. So I haven't really stopped that. But data visualization as a field has really drawn me in because it's not a mother discipline in itself, right? It has elements of statistics, it has elements of design, it has elements of communication, and of course, elements of computer science, because at the end of the day, it all comes together with programming. So that's the part that has really drawn me in because so far my training had been very technical. And all of a sudden, in data visualization, I get to think about form, I get to think about space, I get to think about color, I get to think about emotions, because when you're communicating things, you do want to think about the emotions associated with the color or with the message that you're thinking about. And that interdisciplinary nature of the field is what excites me.
Oh, that's also very important these days. There are so many. I used to work at Microsoft before starting Network Capital, and there we built tools like Power BI, which is used by various organizations. There are a wide range of Excel is how things got started. But now we're entering an era where a popular assumption is that a lot of data visualization will be taken care by machines, and the role of humans is still to be figured out. I was wondering if you have any comments on that.
Right. So I have also been very curious about this, right? So right now there's a lot of, I guess, a lot of enthusiasm about what AI can do for you. And if you do a quick Google search about data visualization and AI, there's this general narrative that's come out that your AI tool will create the graph for you. Right?
Yeah.
But I did try that out. Okay, I did try to get the AI to generate the kind of graph I wanted to, and it didn't really happen. There was a big gap between what I would have wanted and what currently the AI tools, even something like ChatGPT 4, can actually turn out. Not to say that it might not change. Of course, it's evolving and it might get better. But at the end of the day, the machine is still creating something without the context. And the context is something only the human knows. Yeah. If you are looking at the data and you want to communicate something, unless you're able to really articulate what you want, in which case the skill is from you. The onus is on you to then very clearly articulate what you want to the machine. Yeah. And then the machine will perhaps be able to give you something which you will have to anyway tweak, right? So at best, AI is also a tool, and you cannot take the human out of the equation if you really want something very effective for a particular scenario.
Understood. have you encountered organizations where the data collection is faulty? Like they have multiple systems going on and perhaps drawing insights from all of them together. It just creates a lot of overload, which leads to wrong inferences. One, have you come across those systems? And two, what are some ways in which organizations can make data visualization more accessible across the various rungs?
So I haven't particularly worked with organizations per se in terms of trying to help them create these tools. I'm more in the ivory tower talking about the empirical studies in terms of how visual perception matters and at that level. But also I have tried to work a little bit on relevant cases in data visualization because there's a big dearth of those today. So as you know, at IIMA, we are proponents of the case study method. So for us in the classroom, it's very, very important to have relevant cases to get the students to think about whatever we're talking about in a particular context, right? But we don't have enough in data visualization. So I did land up writing a couple of my own cases. One for exploratory data visualization, one for storytelling with data, where I spoke to a few people, tried to get their situations in their particular companies. For example, one of the cases is loosely based on inputs I got from somebody who works at Google. And another case was in terms of some things that happened at Unilever, right? So, but I should tell you that companies are not very transparent, especially when it comes to how they actually leverage and manage their data flow end to end, because that's kind of their USP. But I did get some snippets out, which I have channeled into these cases so that it helps our students understand at least some ways in which data visualization can help. Coming to your second question on what can companies do to actually get this accessible across the ranks. Today, I think nobody can escape data visualization. It's not enough to say, I have something and I'm going to call my graph designer and get them to create a graph for me, or I'm going to call the analyst, and the analyst is going to take care of this. Everybody needs to be comfortable with the end-to-end pipeline of getting your data, understanding what you want, being able to visualize what you want to communicate, not leaving it to somebody else. Because as I said, at the end of the day, it's that person who knows what needs to be done next. So in terms of 101 data visualization, simple, effective frameworks that people can use, everybody needs to go through that. And that would definitely help anybody in the organization get more comfortable with using these tools. So I'm not a big fan of the fancy tools. So you don't necessarily need Power BI, or you don't necessarily need Tableau for all functionalities. Some people do need those tools. But even if you're just using Excel, the defaults in Excel, for example, are horrendous. Right? Yeah. So once you understand the key design elements, how do you use pre-attentive attributes to draw out your insights? How do you use color to your advantage? How do you use the final design elements to your advantage? You can transform your graph even with the very basic.
Yeah, that's so true. You can't really throw a software at a problem or a solution at a problem. You first have to figure out what the problem is. And some organizations, have done a really good job. Like Our World in Data is it helps a lot of people draw inferences through accessible data visualization and so forth. The World Bank, World Economic Forum, etc., are trying their best to evangelize that kind of information. What are some interesting insights that you have for people just getting started in this field who've realized that, yes, they must become fluent with data? Step one, read your book. Step two, what should they do?
I would say practice, practice, practice. Because the theory is out there. It could be my book. It could be, there are a host of wonderful books on data visualization. One of the reasons I wrote my book is most of the other books are very expensive for us, for Indian audiences, because they're priced in dollars, and then it's quite inaccessible. the knowledge is there, but it's not easy to own your own set of books. So I've kind of tried to distill a lot of knowledge into a very easy to read and affordable package so that everybody can get their hands on it. That was one of my main reasons for writing this book as well. Also because I've been teaching this for now almost 13 or 14 years, and there's a lot that I had bottled up in terms of what I wanted to say and how I wanted to say it. So when I actually started writing the book, it just flowed out, right? Because it was so many years of insights that I wanted to bring out. But that said, of course, for a beginner, the theory is quite easily accessible, but it won't work till you actually start putting it to use. And one of the easiest ways, and this is an exercise I do in my class, is I ask them to bring out some graph that they've created in the past. Right? Something that you've created in a particular scenario. Now apply the theory to your own graph and critique it from all the perspective that now you've come across in terms of understanding your audience, in terms of the message you want to bring out, in terms of are you actually highlighting what you want your audience to see? Are you using annotations carefully? Are you using action titles? How have you used color? All of these things that we cover in theory. Apply that to your own graph that you've created in the past, critique it, and redesign it. And that simple exercise has so many insights in it. And you can do it as many times as you want. It's a great learning experience.
I can imagine. I reckon that writing a book for people who are both conversant with data and those who are beginners would be hard. What were the challenges that you encountered in structuring and writing the book? And what has been, now that the book is out, the most meaningful or satisfying aspect of it?
So I think the most challenging aspect was, again, understanding my audience. Right? Because that's what I teach. The first thing you want to do is you want to know who your audience is. So initially, I did block up quite a bit because I didn't have a specific audience in mind. It's like, okay, if I write this, then what will my colleagues say? Or if I write this, what will somebody just getting into data visualization get out of it? And because the book can't really speak to a very wide range. It can in a way, but when you're writing it, if you think about everybody, it's very difficult to articulate things, right? So, and then I picked one particular kind of audience that I wanted to write to, which was somebody who worked with data on a regular basis, but probably had just used some of the defaults so far and hadn't really applied themselves to some of the finer science or art behind the field. So somebody who knew what a bar graph was, somebody who knew what a box plot was, but had just used the defaults that the software was giving them, which is typically how most people would use the data. You get your table and then you kind of push it into whatever graph the software is kind of prompting you to push it in, right? Or whatever looks okay, without understanding the message that you want. So once I had that person as my audience, I think the book actually started flowing.
Then you knew what not to put, what to double down on, and really figuring out who your audience is and what would be helpful to them. And many books, I think, especially on technical and semi-technical topics, struggle to find who's this for. So I wish you and the readers of the book the absolute best in sharing the work. I was wondering if you have any parting message or suggestions for the readers of the book or prospective data visualization enthusiasts.
So what I would say is, if you do read my book, let that be a starting point to the field, because it does introduce you to a lot of interesting stuff, but it's just the beginning. There's so much more out there. And what I'm hoping is this will actually help a lot of people fall in love with the potential for well thought out and truthful and honest visualization.
I think that's a beautiful wish. We're going to put the link of this book when we publish this, and hopefully you can send it to other people who might find this conversation interesting. I'm pretty sure that all Network Capital Platform members will be deeply interested and inspired by your work. Thank you so much, Kavitha. Truly appreciate your time and look forward to hosting you again in person, perhaps.
Thank you so much, Utkarsh. It's been a pleasure.